Grubhub, DoorDash, or any other food delivery employees. What's the most bizarre thing that happened when you knocked on someone's door? Story 1. It was that one time. I followed a weird middle-aged guy into his basement for a life-affirming surprise. While delivering pizzas, my attitude is that nothing can really go that wrong so long as I drive carefully, avoid mugging, and never enter a customer's home. When I was younger and hadn't yet adopted that last rule, I delivered a proper stack of pizzas to a really nice house in a very wealthy neighborhood where I was greeted by a mid-50s suburbanite guy. I had like 50 pounds of pizzas and he was just vibrating with excitement like a little kid asking me if I wanted to see something amazing in his basement where the pizzas were going anyway. Yeah, it sounds a lot like a red flag, but from his vibe and the amount of pizza he'd ordered, I figured he was having some kind of game night with his buddies and was eager to show off his layout, entertainment system, bar, and whatnot. Wealthy guys love showing the sweet toys they worked for to broke younger folks, and when you're working for tips, sometimes an ooh or an A at a car or in-home luxury you don't care about is worth an extra $10. So I followed him into his huge house, preparing myself to express amazement at his whatever. We got down to the basement, and it was a puppy party. An actual puppy party. Some sort of adoption event he'd set up for his kid's birthday. Exactly as I'd expected, it was a classic rich guy basement with a full bar and pool table, and wall-sized entertainment center, and huge sectional couch and recliners. What I didn't expect was a gaggle of 8th grade girls playing with dozens of puppies being supervised by handlers. Every kind of puppy I could imagine. I set the pizzas down on the bar and just sat on the floor and squealed and giggled while puppies tried to eat the smell of pizza off of me, succeeding only in devouring my heart through my face. After a few minutes, I stood up, all teary-eyed and flushed with happiness, and the guy just grinned his understanding at me, gave me an envelope of cash, and sent me on my way. The hit of oxytocin and serotonin from those puppies still warms me years later. Freaking puppy party, man. My life is fuller knowing that it can even happen. Jokes aside, my delightful story is an example of survivor bias, and everyone should continue staying away from weird dudes' basements and vans. Before we continue, do us a quick favor. Smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. I delivered pizza in my small rural southern town back in the 2000s. One of the girls I went to high school with ordered in the afternoon. She knew I was working and had to have known we only had one driver in the afternoons. When I showed up, she was in cheap lingerie, had candles lit, and was wearing some dollar store perfume. She kept trying to get me to come in and I refused. After several minutes of failed flirting, she finally paid, and I was on my way. She seemed pissed that I turned her down. It wasn't unusual to get tipped with alcohol or hits off a bowl, but that was the trashiest experience I had. Story 3. I used to deliver for Pizza Hut. One hot summer afternoon, I got a delivery of a pizza and wings to what looked like a restaurant. Turns out, there were small studio apartments above it, and I knocked on the door anxiously, and this was a particularly seedy area of town. This guy in his 50s answers the door fully unclothed, clearly whacked out on some sort of stimulant, and gives me a bunch of ones. I peer into his apartment as he's fishing for change, and there's someone on his bed in this trash-filled apartment in a full gimp suit and gas mask. Then I noticed the smell. It smelled strongly of piss and poop. I think he was pissing and playing with poop with whoever was in the gimp suit. I got the chance and immediately left and shut it out of my memory. Also, one time I was doing a delivery and there was a drive-by shooting about a block away around the corner as I was walking up to the door. I had a shotgun in my trunk, and the mother said, "Oh my God, they're shooting again. Come inside quick." So, I grabbed my shotgun, ran inside, and waited until long after the shots stopped before I went back to my car. She tipped me heavily for protecting her. She never told my boss about the gun, and no one got killed in the drive-by, thankfully. Story 4. I used to deliver for a pizza place in a college town, so I've been in a few amusing incidents. I once delivered to a house that had a sign on the front that said, "Doorbell broken, yell ding dong instead." So of course I did. I heard some laughter from inside and a confused "what the heck." A young woman opened the door with a confused look on her face, and I just pointed and said, "Sign said yell ding dong." Apparently, no one had ever actually done it, and they forgot it was there. One time, I delivered to the bouncer doorman at an outdoor frat party. The guy appeared to be in his early 20s, a bit over 6 feet tall, and absolutely jacked. He seemed broader than he was tall. When he opened the box to check the food, he looked like he was about to weep with joy, and he said something along the lines of, "This is the most beautiful thing I've seen in a night. And there are some fine women in there." Pizza apparently makes gym bros wax poetic. One time, I rolled up to a house and could smell the pot they were smoking as soon as I parked. This particular house was at least 30 feet back, but the smell was so strong it carried all the way to the street. I knocked on the door, and after a couple of moments of hearing somebody fumbling inside, a window opened and a guy started talking to me through it. Long story short, these guys were so stoned they couldn't figure out the door. Eventually, I just had to deliver through the window because at least 3 guys were stumped by the door. The guy at the window apologized and said it wasn't their house, as if a lack of familiarity and not an extreme excess of grass were the explanation. I'm glad the restaurant didn't do drug test after that one. Finally, the craziest of all the crap I saw happened just a couple of months into the job. I pulled up behind a residential building that wasn't quite a dorm but also wasn't quite a frat house. It was some sort of residence exclusive to an honors society of some kind. Regardless, it had an alley to one side that led to a small parking lot in the back. I pull up, call the dude who asked if I'm in the back. I confirm that I am, and the dude says something like, "Okay, great." A moment later, he walks out the back of the building wearing nothing but a ball cap. He's covering his dong with one hand and holding a 20 in the other. I was so shocked that I just used the bag to break line of sight to his lower half and otherwise continued the transaction like normal. After I handed him his food, I went to leave, but before I could, he said to a thankfully clothed friend, "Hey Joe, can't remember the actual name, get a picture of us." "Hey, are those your parents?" Turn to see a car pulling away, and Joe says, "Nah, that's just my mom." So Mr. Ballcap ducks out of sight, giving me the perfect opportunity to flee. However, I'm in such a state of confusion from the whole situation that I just stand there dumbfounded. After a moment, Joe's mom pulls out of view. The guy comes out of hiding, puts an arm around my shoulder, the 20 holding side, thankfully, and Joe snaps a photo. A sensible person would have turned away, covered their face, or objected. Anything really? Instead, I held my delivery bag in front of my chest like a shield, looked at the camera, and half smiled, half grimaced as the picture was taken. Then, I went back to work. Finally, as a follow-up to that event, about a month later, I delivered to a building across the street from the honors residence, and the guy I'm delivering to says, "Hey, did you deliver to an unclothed guy the other day?" "I thought so, that was me." To which I replied, "Okay, I'm glad you found your clothes. Never saw that guy again." Story 5. Well, it's the reverse, meaning it's the strangest scenario I've had as a delivery customer. Around 2004-2005, I lived alone in New Jersey with no car, but I did have a fast metabolism. So I ordered from the local pizza place, pretty much every other night. The owner and I loosely became friends after what was probably 100+ orders, to the point where more than once he let me order and pay the next time. Delivery was usually done by someone in a beaten-up car, or, at best, a few-year-old sedan. One summer night, I placed an order for delivery right before closing. About an hour later, a dark car creeps up the driveway. Despite it being pitch black out, I could tell by the reflections on the paint that something was different. It was downright surreal, like a CGI rendering of a fake car. This is weird, I think to myself. Who can this be? The delivery is going to be here any minute, so I hope this bozo turns around and gets out of here quick. As it comes closer, I notice the design is unlike anything I've ever seen before. Eventually it pulls all the way up, does a K-turn, and much to my surprise, parks. I can now faintly make out a logo, 2 R's stacked on top of each other. I didn't know much about cars, but I did know enough to know what 2 R's meant, along with the fact that anything made by said car manufacturer cost more than most luxury homes. Surely this is a mistake. What is this person doing in my driveway in the middle of the night? I wonder to myself, starting to grow slightly concerned. The driver's door opens, and a man calmly gets out. He looked like he just stepped off the set of a James Bond movie. Now, if I didn't know much about cars, I surely knew even less about suits, but I could tell this guy's suit was worth more than my life. He suavely reaches into the car and pulls out a pizza, my pizza. He walks up the driveway and hands it to me. At this point, my mouth was opening and closing, but no words were coming out. I was like a fish out of water. I immediately started fumbling with the damp, sweaty dollars I had in my fist, trying to count out a tip, and he shook his head and said, "No." Then he tells me to enjoy my pizza and have a good night. At this point, I slowly nodded, not knowing what else to do. He got back in his car, quietly pulled out of the driveway, and drove off into the night. A few days later, I decided to get some exercise and walk up to the pizza place rather than getting delivery. The owner was there, and I mentioned the peculiar experience I had. He started laughing and told me that was my brother. He's VP of Finance for JP Morgan in NYC. I forgot to give your pizza to the delivery driver before he left, and I had to clean up for at least an hour, so I couldn't deliver it myself. My brother just happened to stop by to see me on his way home, so I asked him to drop it off to you since you're one of my most regular customers. At the time, Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul wasn't yet a thing, but looking back, I was afraid Gus Fring would get out and ask me to hand over the stuff, to which I would insist I had no idea what he was talking about. Then he would stare at me with those cold, dead, glaring eyes for 2 solid minutes before Mike would get out and insist I walk straight forward and look up at the stars. Story 6. The delivery instructions were, beat on the door like you're the cops and then roar like a T-Rex to scare my kids. I did this, but a small, extremely confused lady answered the door. Apparently the husband had written those instructions for a prior delivery and had not realized delivery instructions would be copied over to the next delivery if not deleted. I blurted out, "It said to do that," before she could say anything. Then she laughed. Story 7. I drove for DoorDash, and I can probably think of something, but my brother-in-law drove for a grass's delivery service, and he was almost offed or something. He gets the order from dispatch at around 1 a.m. and I live in northern San Diego County, but the order was in Indian Territory, so you know anything kinda goes out there. It's about a 45-minute drive, and it's used a lot for people to hide out, and a lot of people grow out there too. The name on the order was the weirdest name I've ever seen. I can't even remember what his name was, but it was very long and it didn't look like any sort of language I've ever seen. And they have to send pictures of their ID to be verified, and it says the same name on the ID. Anyway, my brother-in-law gets to where the delivery address is, which is what he described as a one-way gravel road with absolutely no streetlights or anything being close to that area for a couple of miles. The delivery address was all the way at the bottom of the road, which was a dead end, and the only way to get out was to reverse. He texted the person getting the delivery and got no answer for about 5 minutes. He gave the number a call and still got no answer. When he put the phone down, he said this extremely tall and pale white dude just rose up from the bushes on his passenger side but was completely silent, like no footsteps or anything. The dude came up to my brother-in-law's passenger window and just stuck his head in the window, and my brother said the black of his eyes were so dilated and filled the majority of his eyes, but he wasn't looking at my brother. He immediately looked to the right of him and kept staring there, almost to like get him to look that way. When he stuck his head in, all he said was, "You got my delivery?" My brother-in-law never took his eyes off of him and reached for the delivery and handed it off to him. He said the guy kept staring for like 2 seconds more before reaching into his pocket and handing him the money. When he left my brother-in-law's car, he literally just turned around and walked off into the bushes. My brother-in-law told me he reversed out of there so fast while watching in front of him to make sure they weren't chasing after him or some crap. He only worked there for another month. Story 8. I am not a delivery employee, but I will comment on how fast our local Domino's was. My future husband and I were having a night at a cheap hotel one night. Both of us lived with our parents, still, as we were still in our early 20s. We got hungry and decided to order some pizza. Well, after he called and placed the order, we figured we had enough time for a decent shag, which should tell you about the usual wait times. Well, things get a little wild, and next thing you know, my future husband is in boxers. His hands are tied together and his feet are as well, and there's a scarf in his mouth, and I'm not completely dressed either. And wouldn't you know it, of course, the pizza delivery guy would decide to be fast as heck that day. We hear a knock at our hotel door just as things are getting steamy and we both freak. My future husband earned big points by saying, "Screw it, open the door through the gag," and so I did. His hands are tied, remember? The poor teenager looked obviously shocked and humored to see some 20-something guy all tied up, answering the door in his boxers. The best part is my husband forgot his wallet on the dresser and I, not dressed, had to try and be really fast and get the wallet, hide behind the door again, hand it to tied-up fiancé. He gestures to me to remove the gag, so I peek out from behind the door and pull it out of his mouth. Both guys laugh. I'm red-faced. Husband fumbles the cash and a decent tip to the teen and asks him how his night has been so far. The teen answers laughing while handing the pizza very carefully into the tied hands, something along the lines of, "Better now." They say bye. I close the door, embarrassment all over my face, and my husband puts pizza on the table, raises an eyebrow, and tells me to get back to where we left off. Pizza got cold, but I didn't. So glad I married the right guy. Story 9. I used to deliver pizzas when I was 18. Once I brought a huge order to a house on a weekday evening, where clearly a bunch of middle-aged friends were having a huge party. The door opened, and a 40-something guy answered and yelled over his shoulder, "The pizza's here." Everyone was clearly trashed already. It's around 7 p.m. He gives me a 1-second sign and goes back in the house. I hear him telling everyone to give up cash to pitch in for the order. Another 40-something wasted lady comes busting out past me, goes to the passenger side of a truck, then just lies the top part of her body down inside the truck on the seat, and I think she falls asleep for a few minutes. I'm on the doorstep holding 10 pizzas. The door is wide open, rowdy 40 to 50-year-olds party is hopping, and the lady who has my money is asleep with her front half in the truck. I'm about to yell for someone else to help me when she gets up, then stumbles over to me. The conversation goes something like this. The wasted lady asked, "How much is it?" And I replied, $108. Staring at a wad of bills in her hands, she then shoved them all at me and demanded, "You count that." I did, and told her, "You gave me $164. She blinked and asked, "Is that too much?" I said, "Well, I don't think so, but your bill is only $108. She snapped back, "Well, you count that." I repeated, "Ma'am, it's $164. She stared at me for a second, glanced at the pizza, then at the money, before reaching into her pocket, pulling out another $10 bill, and slapping it on top of the pile. "And there's your tip," she declared. I unloaded the pizzas and took off as fast as I could. Best tip I've ever made in my life. Story 10. I once had a delivery for 10 bacon cheeseburgers, but literally, just as I parked in front of the address, Skip the Dishes called me and said the order had been canceled. However, the guy at the delivery address was sitting on his porch and saw me, and he just goes, "Skip the Dishes?" So I say, "Yeah, but they let me know the order's canceled." He says, "Yeah, you're the 5th delivery I've had, but this is the first time it's been canceled." Turns out he had gotten into a disagreement with a woman down the block, and her way of getting back at him was by setting up a fake account for him and just delivery bombing him with ridiculous food orders. This was pre-pandemic, when choosing cash payment was still allowed, so she didn't have to pay anything up front to do this. Skip the Dishes must have been in the process of blocking the account just as I pulled up. Anyway, he and I laugh at how petty the whole thing is, and then I accept my next order and start heading to the next restaurant. Except I am now in possession of 10 bacon cheeseburgers. Good burgers too. If you've ever had a burger from Five Guys and Fries, they were very similar to that. Anyway, I ate one, but obviously I can't eat 10 burgers, so for the rest of my shift, I got to be a hero by giving the gift of a burger. Each time I would go to a restaurant to pick up my order, I would give the restaurant worker a free meal. I also counter-offered a burger to a homeless person who came up to my car to ask for money. He seemed surprised, but he accepted. Eventually, once I was on to my last delivery at Montana's, I still had 2 burgers left, so I gave them to a server working there, and she just kinda melted, like she was seriously so touched. It was adorable. She was like, "Really? You're just gonna give me free bacon cheeseburgers? Oh my God, Thank you so much. I think she must have been due for a meal break or something because it was so sincere. More than one restaurant worker insisted on giving me something in return, so I ended up with a stash of drinks in my car by the end. Story 11. It was a Tuesday afternoon around 3:30. A regular called and ordered his regular pizza. This guy was always nice to me, but I could tell he was doing some hard stuff because he had lost so much weight and started to get lesions on his forehead and hands as time went on. I get to his house around 4, maybe 4:15, deliver the pizza, and I'm walking back to my car when I feel an iron grip on my shoulder, and someone shouts, "You gotta get out of the way." I turn, and there are 4 or 5 county sheriff's deputies in full tactical gear. There were probably 15 to 20 police officers in total. They lead me behind one of their cars and tell me not to move, then bust this guy's door down and go in shouting "Drug Task Force" and all that. I had to stay there for about an hour and had my car searched and everything. All that they found was a travel mug that my mom gave me a while before I thought I had lost. Never took another delivery to that guy. I wonder about him sometimes. I never found out the actual reason behind the raid, but I have my suspicions. Story 12. This was 12 years ago when I was a delivery driver for a Chinese food restaurant. Our restaurant delivered beer, which I'm not sure was even legal. And there was one lady who would frequently order 2 egg rolls and 2 six-packs of way overpriced Corona. This relatively small lady, however, had a loss of mobility in her legs for whatever reason, and I guess it was most efficient for her to drag herself around her apartment, as she usually answered the door from her floor and sometimes retreated to the kitchen to get money for payment using this method. After a while, it became clear that she had a problem and felt morally wrong for me to continue delivering her vice straight to her front door. But she tipped well, and my bosses were not turning down her business until one day she made her usual order, and as I arrived, she didn't have the funds for her order. As I was already uncomfortable completing these deliveries for her, I told her I couldn't provide her order without payment, and she dragged herself, limp legs behind her, down the breezeway of her apartment complex, crying and begging me for the booze. Still haunts me sometimes. Story 13. I once delivered $650 worth of cheap sushi, in which there were something like 100 pieces total, to a house that could only be described as a crack house. When I arrived, there was a junked car in the driveway, and what looked like a pair of engines next to it. There were needles and other drugs all over the porch and the grass, but they had the correct code for the delivery, and the guy who answered the door had clean clothes on and a tie. After I left, I was pulled over about a mile away, and the cops said I had been spotted leaving a known drug house. They ran my ID, and I showed them the delivery record on my phone, and they said I was clear to go. I reported the address, and Uber said they permanently blocked that address from ordering ever again. Also, I don't eat sushi due to texture issues, so I have no clue what sushi costs. This happened years ago when Uber Eats was a relatively new idea and only available in select areas of certain cities. I was one of the first Eats drivers in Dallas at that time. I assume things are different now. I know that if you request delivery to an area or address that is known to be unsafe, Uber won't accept the delivery. The second incident was when I, on more than one occasion, had drunks pass out in my car. I did regular Uber as well as delivery, but once had a guy fall asleep while his girlfriend was giving him a blowy. I didn't know what they were up to because it was dark and I couldn't see. I thought they were just making out. After dropping them off and having to wake both of them up while his dong stared at me, I logged off for the night. The next day, as usual, I went to clean my car before logging on and found 2 small baggies containing what the cops later informed me was crack. I can only assume they belonged to the last couple. It would explain how both of them fell asleep mid-BJ. Story 14. It was a rainy, cold, and miserable night. Perfect weather for ordering in. I had 3 deliveries with me. When I reached the first stop, I called the customer, but no one answered. So I walked up to the door and started knocking. A young man, who appeared to be autistic and physically disabled, opened the door in his pajamas and stepped out into the rain to collect the food. Before I could hand him the food, I needed to collect the payment. But just as I was about to ask, the door swung shut behind him, locking him outside with me. He started to cry. He was locked out, standing in the rain, and didn't have the money on him. His mother was asleep in the bedroom with the door closed, and all Junior wanted was a snack. Now I felt like absolute crap. I had more deliveries to make, and couldn't just leave the food without payment. But I also couldn't leave him standing there soaking wet in his jammy jams. So, I made a decision. I called the shop, gave them my credit card to cover his order, and told him he could ride along with me for the next 2 deliveries. He sat in the passenger seat, eating his food, while I tried to figure out what to do next. By the time we finished the last delivery and got back to his house, I helped him knock on the door until his mom, who's also disabled, finally made it to the front and let him back in. The first thing he said, grinning from ear to ear, was, "Mom, I delivered pizza." I was so relieved and moved at that moment, I didn't even bother trying to collect the bill. And I can tell you this, anytime Jack wants to go on a delivery run, I'll be more than happy to take him along. Story 15. I had food that was clearly for one person, a burger, fries, shake, drove up to a house that's very obviously a family house in a very nice neighborhood. No biggie. It was already dark on a weekend night. I walk up to the door, and the room right next to the door is the only one with lights on. It had those expensive wooden horizontal blinds, but you know how you can see a tiny bit through them even when closed. I could see it was an office with wood furniture and a computer monitor on a desk, and I could see movement of some kind. I texted the customer, "I'm out here, standard procedure." Then I hear voices and walk toward the side of the house, because in this area people often use side doors or garage doors and get annoyed if you don't magically know that. But nope, turns out it's just the neighbor. Cool, whatever. I called the customer. They answer after fumbling, super breathless. "Hello?" I answer. "I'm at the front door." Then in a panicky voice he replies, "I'll be right there. Sorry. Movement stops, the door opens, and it's a guy in his early 20s, clearly only in boxers, trying to hide his lower half behind the door. He snatches the food, avoids eye contact, like I'm Medusa, and bolts. Verdict? Pretty sure I accidentally walked in on a private moment at the family computer. Ick. Story 16. I delivered 20+ minutes outside of town once, which was very unlike my usual deliveries. Somewhere I can only think of as, oh, I'm absolutely going to get offed here. I had to drive down a 2-mile gravel driveway that had a single house on it next to a river. I made the delivery with no trouble, and the GPS said the gravel road was supposed to continue on and loop back around to the main one. But about halfway there, the middle of the road was fenced off with rusty bar gates they use for cattle. I turned my car around and noped the heck out of there. The dreary weather and heavy fog contributed to the vibe, I'm sure, but wow. There was also a guy standing by the road as I was driving up, and being a woman in a remote location, plus the ambiance of the place, the fog and the sun going down, I was so scared that I almost crapped myself. The dude went inside before I pulled up, but he had just been standing by the tree across the road. It was just an overall creepy situation. I've never driven anywhere that remote before or since. It was like last week. Story 17. I worked at Domino's for a couple of years and saw plenty of strange crap. I remember one time, I was taking a delivery to a Section 8 apartment. I get to the door and the lady is immediately pissed about her total and starts yelling at me. As I'm trying to explain why the total is the amount it is, I see her dog walk right behind her and take a massive poop on the floor. I decided not to say anything, hoping she'd step in the poop. Well, as I'm giving her the pizza, the dad sees it and starts chasing the dog away. Well, along comes a kid around 3 years old, who also has Down syndrome. He sees a big old chocolate bar on the floor. Or so he thinks. As the lady is still rambling on and apologizing, this kid picks up this turd and takes a bite. With the most disgusted look on his face, he takes the bite out and hands it to his mom. She started yelling at the kid, and I dipped out of that jerk. One of the weirdest experiences I've ever had. Story 18. Once, I delivered to a family, and they were all happy and tipped me $10. I got back to the store only to find out they demanded 2 new pizzas, a refund, and my tip back. Why do you ask? There was a chunk of Canadian bacon on their pizza, and they were Muslim. I didn't make the pizza, and yet I got the biggest burn. Story 19. I was a pizza cook as a teenager. A customer asked for a really spicy pizza. I tried to explain what I could do to help. He cut me off and told me to grab the red pepper flakes. These ones were actually spicy and just shake the bottle for a while. I remember being a bit offended by his attitude. I opened the glass shaker of red pepper flakes and coated the sauce layer. Every single inch of the base was coated with a layer of red pepper flakes. I baked the pie and sent it on its way, fully expecting to get a complaint when I would then arrogantly tell him that I was instructed to make it as hot as possible. The joke was on me though. They never called to complain. Now, 20+ years later, I still wonder how hot that pizza was and if they wound up eating it. Story 20. I worked for a delivery company about 6 years ago. One day, I got an order for a single cigar. The total cost of the goods was about $3, and the delivery fee was $13.5. As he lived way out in the boonies, he also tipped me $10. Turns out he was drunk and thought to himself that the delivery fee is less than a DUI. Smart for someone so drunk, I would say. Story 21. My wife and I have worked for Uber Eats, DoorDash, and Instacart for about 2 years now. We don't have too many stories, mostly just high, drunk, or unclothed people answering the door. My wife is in a few Facebook groups though, and we just heard about a woman who was delivering some food into a private gated home. The gate had to be manually opened by the homeowner, and he let her in, no problem, but then, after she delivered the food, he wouldn't let her leave. It took calling the police, their arriving, and filing a report for her to be able to leave and learn that this was the 3rd time he's done this. Uber, though, won't ban him from their service. Yes, I agree, this sounds like it's breaking the law. I don't know the full details, but I believe the woman is pressing charges, and I believe the police are performing an investigation. With many situations like this, it takes extended investigations and individuals filing charges, and unfortunately, months if not years for an arrest and eventual imprisonment. Uber will ban him once he's as and offs one of them, and then have some PR announcement about how they take their contractors' safety very seriously. This is no joke. I was also an Uber driver and had a terrifying experience with a male passenger that ended with me calling the cops and Uber. The Uber rep wasn't concerned at all about what I went through, told me the guy used someone else's account and tried to refund him for the $18 I made for the ride. Apparently, the rider had used another person's account, a woman he apparently knew, so Uber didn't have any identifying info. After he jumped out of my still-moving car at the end of a terrifying, nearly hour-long ride, I guess he called the woman whose account he used and told her that I was unprofessional. That's a classic move to get an easy refund. The woman called Uber and reported me. I told the rep that I could have died and would never drive for them again. He said, "That's okay, we have other drivers." So yeah, Uber is awful. They seriously responded to me possibly dying with "That's okay, we have other drivers." That's outrageous. When I called Uber to report the rider, they were more concerned with her report about my unprofessionalism and with giving him, really, the account owner, the refund for the ride. Still one of the most unbelievable and terrifying experiences I've ever had. Story 22. I have got a few good stories delivering for the Hut about 10 years ago. 2 of my best runs were delivering to a debauchery. The guy was sitting on his porch in a bathrobe and had to run inside to get more cash, being very careful to block my view inside. But when his buddy came to the door, I got a good look inside. 4 girls and 2 dudes from what I could see, all unclothed with plenty of booze and powder lying around. Not much for a tip, but an interesting delivery I'll never forget. Another delivery I had was to a mansion of a house, and when I got there, nobody answered the door or answered the phone number listed. As I'm about to give up and go back to the store, 3 10 to 12-year-old kids run up saying they ordered the pizza, and their parents were out of town. While the parents were away, they taught themselves how to make homemade smoke bombs, which they used to inadvertently set their backyard on fire. I grabbed their hose and started putting out the fire. They didn't want to call the fire department for fear of getting in trouble, but I made them do it. By the time the fire truck pulled up, I had taken care of the flames and the kids emptied all 3 of their pockets into my hands for about a $40 tip. Story 23. I had just finished a Postmates delivery in the Hollywood Hills when I got pinged to pick up an order at the Starbucks That's just off Laurel Canyon, or in that general area, I can't remember exactly. I like delivering in this area because usually the tips were very good. The person ordering wanted 4 tall iced coffees with no ice. I shrugged that part off because rich LA people are all freaking weirdos, but I was annoyed because I had to place it, which means I had to make those annoying requests instead of just pick up the drinks. I go into the Starbucks and the lady working the counter says, "We've been expecting you," and I was like, okay? If you're a Postmates courier, you know that if you have to place the order, the restaurant would not be expecting you. Then she tells me that this is Ariana Grande's exact order and that I will be delivering to her house. It wasn't her name in the app, but it did occur to me that a celeb of her caliber probably uses an assumed name or has an assistant order for her. I still had my doubts just because I'm a naturally skeptical person. When I got to the address, I had to enter a key code at the gate, which wasn't unusual for this area. But when I saw the view and saw that it was basically its own compound of multiple different houses, I figured that even if it wasn't Ariana Grande's house, it had to be someone obscenely rich and famous. I pulled up to the house number specified in the app and texted that I was there, per the instructions. The person who greeted me was a middle-aged 4'10" Latina woman with a limp. She said thanks, and I left. Story 24. I delivered pizzas for years. There was this one house that I just dreaded going to. It was a tiny little house, and they had a tiny little dog and dog poop all over the floor. It was just everywhere. The woman who lived there was absolutely nuts. She shouted at the kid on the phone who took her order. She shouted at me, and I'd hand her the pizza, and she'd shout that I probably screwed it up. It'd be right, and she'd say, "Well, okay then," and she'd give me a $15 tip. Come to find out, I was the only one who would go there. None of the other pizza places in town would deliver to her, and none of the other people at my Hungry Howie's would deliver there. That's when I learned that my price for allowing myself to be shouted at was $15. After I had been there a year, she stopped calling. Then the house was bulldozed. Now there's a pizza place where she used to live, and it's crappy. Story 25. I delivered pizzas to a rec center for a kid's birthday. There were about 12 pizzas, and they were in the warming bags. I tried to carry all the bags at once, which led to boxes being slanted and the pizzas sliding and squishing into the corners. When I pass the pizzas to the guy, he opens them up and is super upset. He's like, "I'm not paying for this," which is fair, but the policy was, if you don't like the pizza, you can either not pay and I take the pizzas back to the store, or I take the pizzas back to the store and then come back with new ones and you pay full price for those. But he was like, "Nah, I only have this place booked for another 20 minutes. We're eating these, but I ain't paying." So, I didn't really care, but if he didn't pay, it came out of my wallet. So, I called my boss, who was a very aggressive, loudmouth piece of work, and told her what was up. When the guy grabbed the phone from me, he and my boss began screaming at each other over the phone for about 5 minutes, until he screamed, "The only way you're getting this money is if I send it to you up your driver's rear." And then he covered the mic, winked at me, and whispered, "I'm just kidding," and then he hung up. The bill was about $140, so he looked at me and said, "I'm giving you $70 for the pizza, and I'm giving you $40 as a tip. Do not give that $40 to that jerk of a boss you have." So I went back to the store, told her he would only pay $70, and she said, "Oh well, at least we got something," and I got a big tip even though I was the one who screwed up. Story 26. I saw a woman give birth while on the job. I was delivering for a pizza place at the time, and we delivered to a large children's hospital, about a mile from the store. I pulled up to where we normally delivered the valet loop, and a blue F-150 came flying in as I was walking away. The driver jumps out of the truck screaming that his wife is giving birth, and out of the passenger side, I can see plain as day a few of dilation staring me dead in the eye. Story 27. I used to make deliveries last year to make a little extra money. So, one day, I got an order to deliver to a house. The instructions said, "When you arrive, bang on the door very loudly or I won't be able to hear you." So I walked up to the door and I proceeded to knock on the door. The order is contactless delivery, so I set it down on the doorstep and started to walk to my car. All of a sudden, I hear the front door open, and some guy comes charging out of his house straight towards me. He grabs my shirt and starts yelling at me, telling me never to knock on his door like that again. I was taken aback, but I told him the notes he put said to knock loudly. He doesn't even acknowledge what I just said and just continues to say that if I knock on his door again, he'll kick my butt. I pulled myself away and told him not to worry because no one would be back to deliver to him again, and I got in my car and left. Once I got back, I reported him, and as far as I know, he was put on the do not deliver list. Story 28. I delivered pizza in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Most people don't know this, but Pittsburgh is the hilliest city in the country, or that's what we were always told. It also gets ice storms. It's either bad or good for the money combination for a pizza delivery driver, as an ice storm is a great excuse to stay in and order pizza. One frozen evening, I'm attempting to go up a flight of ice-covered stairs with a pizza. The front light came on when I got out of the car with the pie, so I know they know I'm here, and I expect them to open the door when I heroically make it to the top of the stairs, but I don't. On the very last stair before the front door, I slip. I reach out both arms to catch myself, and somehow fling the pizza and the box it comes in way into the air. It's flying end over end. I have this vivid memory of a street lamp illuminating the pizza box as it slowly tumbles through the night, as snow falls all around it, majestic. Reality snaps in. I scramble to my feet and miraculously catch the pizza at the exact moment that the front door opens. I'm standing there with a dumb look on my face, staring at this recently returned from the great beyond pizza in my hands, and the lady who answered the door says, "Well, how much do I owe you?" All I could do was stammer out the total. She gives me cash, whisks the amazing Gymnastic pizza from my arms, and closes the door. I totally expected them to call the shop and complain that the pizza was messed up, but they never did. It makes me wonder if centrifugal force kept the pizza pushed towards the bottom of the box so it wasn't damaged. It's possible. Story 29. Not me, but my poor DoorDash. I ordered DoorDash one Saturday afternoon. When my power went off, my power box is outside, so I ran quickly to the side of the house and left my 3-year-old inside. He was completely unclothed, just after a bathtub, so I figured it would be fine. Unfortunately, my DoorDash came at the same time. I came back around to the front of the house to see a man talking to my 3-year-old, telling him to go inside because it was cold and rainy. He was coming to get me, and toddlers don't care about walking around with no clothes. I was so embarrassed and incredibly grateful that our Dasher was a good guy. I added an additional $15 tip after thanking him and apologizing profusely. Story 30. I pick up 2 filet-o-fishes from McDonald's and drive them to the address listed as the customer's residence. The address is for an entire mobile home park. I texted the customer through the Postmates app to see if I can get more specific instructions. No answer. Then I called them. No answer. I text again. No answer. I call again. And a woman picks up. She sounds like she's in her 60s or 70s. She attempts to give me directions about how I'm supposed to navigate to her place. But as I find out later, I'm on the wrong side of the street, in the wrong half of the park to be following those directions. After several minutes of unsuccessful navigating, she's yelling at me about her food getting cold and accusing me of pranking her and not taking my job seriously. She asks where I am. I told her the number of the closest mobile home, and she screams, "Well, that's a pretty long way from number 9, isn't it?" This is the first time she has mentioned she lives in home number 9. "Yup, it is," I say. She uses some colorful language to describe me and Postmates in general, then hangs up. My phone notifies me that she has canceled her order, meaning I won't get full pay for that delivery. I feel like I have something to prove, so I drive among the mobile homes for a while, and eventually find hers. I knock on her door. She opens it. "Is this the right place?" I ask, daring her to question my work ethic again. It was the right place, after all. She acts all sweet, like she wasn't yelling at me a few minutes ago, and she gives me a fat tip of $20. Later that night, a guy offered to tip me with grass. Story 31. This is one of my favorite random interactions from my time as a delivery driver for a Japanese restaurant. I was sent to this house with an order of a steak hibachi and a couple of sushi rolls that added up to something like $19.6. I like to call before I got to a place, just to give people a bit of a heads up, so by the time I got to the door it was already open. In the doorway stood a chubby kid, about 9 or 10 years old, who reminded me a lot of the kid from Bad Santa but without the curly hair. I tell him the total as I pass off his food. He hands me a $20 bill and with a straight face, he smugly says, "Keep the change, pal." Immediately after, he closed the door, and I stood there for a second trying to process what had just happened. When I got back to my car, I noticed the time and realized it was way too early for that kid to be home from school. I couldn't help but laugh at the whole situation. I wasn't even mad at getting a 40-cent tip because this kid probably faked being sick so he could stay out of school, and was probably in there watching TV or playing video games while eating sushi and feeling like a big shot. I know I would have at that age. Story 32. I delivered pizza in a college town about 15 years ago. I took an order in the early afternoon to an apartment building I had never been to before. It had a locked entry and buzzer-style door, which was unusual for the area. It was usually cheap student housing, or the hallways of the apartment buildings were open-air style. It takes a few minutes, but someone finally buzzes the door and lets me in. I walk towards the apartment and see that the door is open and I can hear really loud music. I get to the door and I see the TV is on with full volume, and across the room is a radio also at full volume. I look to the left, and a man is walking out of the kitchen, and I see he is in a hospital gown. His hair is kind of dirty and messed up, and he seems to be completely out of it. I tell him the total, and he starts looking around for the money. Yes, the gown was tied in the back, but it did not hold up against the constant bending over, looking in various areas. At this point, this is already one of the weirdest things to happen to me, but then it kicks it up a notch. The college town I was in is Lawrence, Kansas, and anyone who has lived there, especially near downtown, will probably know of the peace sign guy. This dude looked like your classic Vietnam War vet. Long hair, sunglasses, leather jacket with no shirt, jeans, and big boots. He would walk around with a cigarette in his mouth, throwing up the peace sign to anyone and everyone. He was mostly harmless, but he could get upset and lash out verbally at people, although I did not know that at the time. So, who should appear at the door behind me, now boxing me into the apartment between him and the hospital gown man, peace sign guy. And he is pissed. He starts yelling about the noise, and he's having to scream pretty loudly just to be heard. The hospital gown man starts yelling right back at him. He still hasn't found the money. I contemplate trying the patio door and running for it. Finally, peace sign guy leaves. Hospital gown man finds the money and proceeds to pull out a massive wad of crisp $20 bills. He tipped pretty well too. Story 33. I worked for Uber Eats. One day I had an order, so naturally I picked up the order and pedaled to the delivery address. Once I get there, I ring the doorbell and no one answers, so I proceed to send a message and wait. 2 minutes later, a very distressed woman comes out screaming at someone inside the house, "Screw you and that jerk of a woman," and left in her car. The person at the door, who was only in his inner, proceeded to slam the door. I let 30 seconds pass and rang the doorbell again. No one answered. I sent another message, and I was ignored. After 10 minutes, I contacted support and they told me that if they didn't answer in 5 minutes, I was free to leave with the food. I waited the 5 minutes, texted support to let them know, and drove back home. My then girlfriend and I had a feast. We Googled the cost of the meal, and it was close to around $1,500, which is a lot for 2 people. We were in a very rough place economically then, and that was the best meal we had had in months. Story 34. My first job was working at a Jimmy John's, and I did deliveries. Business was kinda slow, so the owner expanded the delivery radius to a frankly ludicrous distance. And then there was this hospital that was just beyond it, but they ordered pretty often, so we went there. And they often ordered right before closing. So basically, screw all of those people. I hope they have a horrible life. One night, right before closing, I took an order for 4 sandwiches to the hospital. The delivery was to the ICU. So I went to the nurse's station. They have a readout of all of the vital signs from each room, and one of the heart monitors was flatlining. Nobody seemed alarmed. The head nurse, or whoever it is in that pod, had no idea about the delivery, had to page people to get them to show up and get their stuff. It took forever. The pricing was such that any sandwich would end in 0.5 cents, and the doctors only ever tipped me the 50 cents. The last guy didn't have any cash on him and made me walk with him to the ATM that was on the other side of the hospital. Only tipped me the 50 cents. I exited through the emergency entrance, and there was an extremely pregnant woman outside smoking a cigarette. Then there was a crazy dude hollering obscenities and threats and staggering our way. I wondered if he was going to go after the pregnant lady, and if I needed to run in and get security, but then he started coming after me, so I just jumped in my car and fled. I then got back to the store about 45 minutes after closing, with none of my closing chores started. Seriously, screw doctors. Story 35. I picked up this big one, AM Macus order, of what can only be described as stoner food, which was ice cream with all the toppings at once, every burger with lots of extra cheese. The delivery is in an area I'm not familiar with, so it doesn't strike me that there's no place to drop it until I get to the drop-off address and there's an empty lot, a very closed-looking community center, and nothing else. I got out to see if there's anyone partying in the lot or something, but nothing. So I call the customer, who not only doesn't answer, but their mobile service isn't even connected. So I waited, and, being very new to this, drove back to the Macus. I considered offering the food, most of which I couldn't eat, to some guys hanging out there, but decided that sketchy cold food from some random who pulled into the parking lot probably wouldn't appeal. So I just left all these bags in the parking lot. It was like $80 worth of food too. Story 36. The app told me to pick up the food by 7:05. I drove right to the store, got the food at around 7:03, checked the app for drop-off instructions, and it said, deliver by 7. Okay, whatever. I got to the address at around 7:20. The building I needed to deliver to wasn't there. I walked around a bit, and it was nowhere near where my map took me. I called the customer and said, "Hi, I have your food, but I've been walking around for a bit and can't find your building. Can you walk me through where it is?" They just said okay and hung up. I texted them that I can't deliver the food if I can't find their building. No response. I walked around for a bit more to find the building and I couldn't. I called the driver's support line to explain what happened. As I was dialing, I got a text from the customer around 15 minutes after I called them telling me where their building was. Completely different place than where the app took me. I drove there, dropped off the food, and questioned why I bothered doing this job. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.